He was the CEO of the year. She was the mistress of the hour. And Anthony. Anthony was just the distraction they ignored. While 6-year-old Anthony fought for every breath in the ICU, his father, Frederick Graves, was fighting to get a reservation at the city's most exclusive 5-star hotel. Susan called him 23 times. He blocked her number. Heavenly Father, I come to you tonight for the woman who is hurting in secret, for the mother who smiles through the day to keep everyone else going, but falls apart the moment the door is closed. You know the weight of the empty arms. You know the silence of the room that used to be full of laughter. Lord, for every woman who has had to say goodbye to a child, or a dream, or a love she thought would last forever, I ask that you wrap your arms around her right now. Remind her that her tears are not wasted. Remind her that what is lost in this lifetime is held safely in your hands for the next. Give her the strength to take just one more breath, one more step, one more day. And Father, I pray for our families. In a world that tries so hard to pull us apart, with distractions, with stress, with shadows, I ask you to be the glue that holds us together. Build a hedge of protection around our homes. Let no weapon formed against our marriages or our children prosper. Heal the cracks in our foundations. Turn our hearts back toward each other. Let our homes be places of peace, not battlegrounds. Let forgiveness flow like water. And let love be the anchor that keeps us steady when the storms come. We trust you with our broken pieces, and we trust you with our future. In your holy name, amen. Susan prayed to God 23 times that night. She begged for a miracle while her son's heart stopped beating. But the only person who could have saved him, the man with the platinum insurance card, the man who swore to protect them, was busy ordering room service with another woman. While 6-year-old Anthony took his final, shuddering breath in the City General ICU, his father, CEO Frederick Graves, was 10 miles away in the presidential suite, turning his phone to Do Not Disturb. He saw his wife's name flash on the screen, and he swiped it away. But Frederick made a calculation error that no CEO should ever make. He forgot about the old man sitting quietly in the hospital waiting room. He thought Floyd Jones was just a broke, retired grandfather who lived in a small apartment. He never suspected that the apartment was the penthouse of a building Floyd owned, or that the old man was the silent majority shareholder of the bank holding Frederick's entire fortune. By the time Frederick walked into the ICU the next morning, checking his watch and rehearsing his lies, he wasn't just a grieving father. He was a bankrupt man walking into a trap. And the savage revenge that was about to hit him wouldn't just take his money. It would take his soul. Do you think a father who chooses a mistress over his dying child deserves mercy? If you want to see this billionaire grandfather destroy Frederick's entire life piece by piece, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe what happens in the boardroom. The monitors in the pediatric ICU didn't just beep, they screamed. It was a mechanical, rhythmic shrieking that tore through Susan's composure like a jagged knife. 6-year-old Anthony was thrashing against the restraints, his small chest heaving as his lungs failed to pull in the oxygen they so desperately needed. The room was a blur of blue scrubs and panic, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and impending death. "Where is he?" Dr. Evans barked, his eyes scanning the monitors that were flashing critical red warnings. "Mrs. Graves, the insurance has flagged the respiratory bypass as experimental. We need the primary policyholder's signature to override it. We need Frederick here now." Susan's fingers were slick with sweat as she gripped her phone. She dialed again. The 23rd time, her thumb hovered over the contact photo. Frederick smiling in a tuxedo, the image of a perfect father. She squeezed her eyes shut, a desperate prayer forming on her lips, begging God to intervene, to soften her husband's heart, to make the line connect. "Please, Frederick," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of a terror so absolute it felt like drowning. "Pick up. For God's sake, just pick up." 10 miles away, the air didn't smell of fear and antiseptic. It smelled of white tea, imported silk, and arrogance. Frederick Graves, the celebrated CEO, sighed heavily as his phone vibrated against the marble nightstand of the Ritz-Carlton's presidential suite. The harsh light of the screen cut through the darkness, illuminating the curve of Julia's bare shoulder as she slept beside him. He glanced at the caller ID. Susan, 23, missed calls. He didn't feel worry. He felt irritation. Susan was always overreacting. Anthony probably had a mild fever, or perhaps another asthma flare-up she was too weak to handle alone. She was hysterical, he told himself, checking his reflection in the darkened window. He needed rest. He had a shareholder meeting in the morning, and he deserved this peace. With a callous, deliberate swipe of his thumb, he didn't just silence the ringer. He tapped the crescent moon icon for "Do Not Disturb." The vibration stopped. The connection was severed. He rolled over, pulling the high thread count duvet over his shoulder, choosing the warmth of his mistress over the cold reality of his dying son. At 3 a.m., the screaming monitors in the ICU finally went silent, replaced by a singular, endless tone that haunts every mother's nightmare. The flat line. Susan fell to her knees, the prayer beads in her hand snapping and scattering across the cold linoleum floor like spilled bones. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The silence in the room was heavier than any noise. Dr. Evans stepped back, pulling his mask down, his face etched with defeat. "Time of death," he murmured, looking at the clock on the wall. 3 a.m. Anthony's hand was still warm, but the light behind his eyes, the light Frederick had sworn to protect, was gone forever. Susan laid her head on her son's still chest, weeping into the silence, while across the city, in a room that cost more than a funeral, Frederick Graves slept soundly. Frederick Graves walked into the hospital waiting room at 8:15 a.m., bringing with him the scent of expensive dark roast coffee and the crisp morning air of a man who had slept a full 8 hours. He adjusted his silk tie, practicing the expression of frazzled concern he had perfected in the elevator ride up. He needed to look busy, important, and just the right amount of apologetic. "Susan," he called out, spotting his wife huddled in a plastic chair near the nurse's station. She looked small, diminished, as if the last 5 hours had aged her a decade. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, staring at nothing. He hurried over, dropping to one knee beside her, careful not to scuff his Italian leather shoes. "I came as soon as I saw the messages. My phone died in the middle of that merger meeting with the Japanese partners. I didn't have a charger. I was frantic when I finally got it on." He reached for her hand, his voice dropping to a practiced hush. "How is he? Is he stable?" Susan didn't move. She didn't pull her hand away. She simply let it lie limp in his grasp, cold and unresponsive. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy, until a shadow fell over them. "He's gone, Frederick." The voice was dry, like old paper. Frederick looked up to see Floyd Jones standing by the vending machine. The old man wore a faded cardigan and gray slacks that had seen better days. He looked every bit the retired pensioner Frederick had always tolerated, with a patronizing smirk. Frederick blinked, feigning shock, though his mind was already calculating the PR implications. "Gone? What have you been... Gone? Dead, Floyd said. The word landed like a stone. 5 hours ago. Frederick stood up slowly, covering his mouth with a hand that was perfectly manicured. Oh my God, no. No, that's impossible. I should have been here. Yes, Floyd said, his voice devoid of emotion. You should have. Frederick set his phone down on the small table between the chairs to rub his temples, performing grief for an audience of 2. I told you, the battery. The meeting ran late. The signal in that conference room is terrible. While Frederick squeezed his eyes shut to conjure a tear, Floyd reached out. His hand, spotted with age, but steady as a surgeon's, picked up the sleek black smartphone. He tapped the screen. It lit up instantly. Frederick's eyes snapped open. Hey, give me that. But Floyd was already looking at the top corner of the screen. He turned the phone so the light caught Frederick's face. There, clear as day, was the Wi-Fi symbol, and below it, the notification that had just popped up, betrayed by the device's automatic memory. Last active connection, Ritz-Carlton Guest Network, 2:58 a.m. The silence that followed was louder than the flatline had been. Frederick froze, his mouth half open, the lie dying in his throat. He looked at the old man, expecting anger, expecting shouting. Instead, he saw something far worse. Floyd's eyes were cold, hard, and utterly devoid of mercy. It was the look of a man who wasn't looking at a son-in-law anymore, but at a target. The Ritz, Floyd whispered, the name sounding like a curse. You were 10 miles away. He set the phone back down gently, almost reverently. You better pray to whatever God you believe in, Frederick, because I'm about to become the devil you don't. 3 days later, the funeral took place under a sky the color of wet ash, the kind that made the world look like it had already given up. Susan stood at the front of the chapel beside a small white casket, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned bone pale. Yet she couldn't feel them at all. Her lips moved without sound, half prayer, half bargaining, asking God for one impossible thing. Rewind time, just a little, to the moment before the ICU went quiet. Frederick Graves arrived 15 minutes late, as if grief had a calendar invite he could push back. He wore an immaculate black suit and a face arranged into sorrow, but his eyes kept drifting to the glow of his phone screen like it was the only heartbeat he still cared about. He leaned toward Susan once, voice low, breath smelling faintly of mint and something too expensive for a man claiming he'd spent the night in panic. We should keep this short, he murmured, thumb scrolling. There's a gala tonight. Investors. If I don't show, it'll start rumors. Susan didn't answer. She couldn't. Words felt like a betrayal of Anthony, like speaking meant accepting that her son was truly gone. The priest spoke of angels and eternity. But Susan heard only the echo of flatline silence. And somewhere deep inside her, a raw question kept clawing upward. How does a mother bury a child while the father checks his schedule? Floyd Jones stayed close, quiet, almost invisible in his worn cardigan. An old man the world would overlook without effort. But when Frederick checked his watch again at the graveside, Floyd's gaze sharpened, and for a second the air felt colder than the winter ground. Susan saw it even through her numbness. Something in her father had shifted from mourning into calculation. After the last condolence, after the final shovel of dirt, Frederick's phone buzzed and his shoulders visibly loosened, as if permission had been granted to return to the real world. He kissed Susan's forehead, light, performative, then stepped back. I'll meet you at home later, he said, already turning away. Not yet, Floyd said. Frederick paused, annoyed, as if being addressed by an elderly man was an inconvenience. Floyd guided Susan toward the side of the church, where the noise of mourners faded into a low murmur. His voice softened, but it didn't tremble. "Listen to me, Susan. You don't have to beg heaven for justice." He reached into his pocket and placed a simple black card in her palm. No flashy gold letters, just a name and a crest that looked like it belonged on the front doors of skyscrapers. Jones Global. The boutique smelled of white leather and old money, a scent Frederick Graves usually found comforting. He stood at the glass counter of Van Cleef and Arpels, watching Julia trace a diamond necklace with a manicured fingernail. It was an apology gift, not for the death of his son, but for the stress of the last 2 days. He pulled out his Centurion card, the heavy black titanium cool against his palm, and slid it across the glass with the casual indifference of a man who never checks price tags. The sales associate, a woman with a smile as tight as a surgical stitch, inserted the card. A moment later, the machine beeped, a harsh, dissonant sound in the quiet store. "I'm sorry, Mr. Graves," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "It's declined." Frederick laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Don't be ridiculous. Run it again. It's the chip." She did. The beep repeated. "Declined code 05, sir. Do not honor." Frederick felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck. Julia stopped admiring the diamonds and looked at him, her brow furrowing in confusion. He snatched the card back and slapped down his platinum visa. "Use this one." Beep. "Declined." "There is clearly a system outage." Frederick snapped, grabbing his wallet. He shoved the cards back in, ignoring the pitying look from the clerk and the sudden, awkward silence from Julia. "I'll handle this. One moment." He stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city noise drowning out his cursing, and dialed his private banker's direct line. "Charles, what the hell is going on? I'm standing at a counter looking like a fool. Unfreeze my accounts immediately." "Mr. Graves." Charles's voice was uncharacteristically stiff, stripped of its usual obsequious warmth. "I can't unfreeze what we no longer hold. Since the funeral yesterday, the bank has been quietly divesting your portfolio. By 9 a.m. this morning, the transfer was finalized." Frederick stopped walking. "Divested? You manage my mortgage, my margin loans, my company credit line. You can't just divest." "We sold the debt, sir," Charles interrupted. "A private equity firm made a bulk offer for your liabilities. They purchased the notes at full face value. You owe them now." "Who?" Frederick demanded, his grip on the phone tightening until his knuckles turned white. "Who bought my debt?" "A holding company called Acheron Ventures." Frederick scoffed. He had never heard of them. Some small-time vulture fund trying to make a name for themselves. They probably had a glitch in their onboarding system that froze his assets during the transfer. It was administrative incompetence, nothing more. "Fine," Frederick spat. "I'll have my lawyers fix this mess in the morning. I expect a formal apology letter on my desk by noon." He hung up without waiting for a response. He looked back through the window at Julia, who was checking her reflection in the glass. It was just a glitch, he told himself, straightening his tie. A computer error. He had no idea that Acheron was a subsidiary of Jones Global, or that the man pulling the strings wasn't looking for a return on investment. He was looking for a return on pain. Frederick Graves didn't panic easily, but the lingering unease from the declined credit cards had settled in his gut like cold lead. He needed to tie up loose ends. The Ritz-Carlton footage, if Susan's lawyer ever subpoenaed records during a divorce, however unlikely that was, given her fragile state. A time-stamped video of him entering the presidential suite while Anthony was coding in the ICU would be inconvenient. He walked into the hotel lobby with the confident stride of a man who solved problems with a checkbook. The concierge desk was busy, but Frederick bypassed the line, heading straight for the general manager's office. He knocked once and entered without waiting. Mr. Sterling, the hotel manager, looked up from his desk. He didn't smile. "Frederick," Sterling said, his tone neutral. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need a favor, Arthur," Frederick said, closing the door behind him and lowering his voice. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, thick, heavy with cash he had scraped together from his office safe. "I need the hallway security footage from the 14th floor erased, specifically from Tuesday night. Just a technical glitch, you understand." Sterling looked at the envelope on the mahogany desk, then back at Frederick. He didn't reach for it. He didn't blink. "I can't do that, Frederick." "Of course you can." Frederick pressed, sliding the envelope closer. "Double it. Triple it. I don't care about the cost. I just need privacy. My family is going through a tragedy, Arthur. The last thing I need is tabloids sniffing around because I had a guest." "It's not about the money," Sterling said, leaning back in his chair. "It's about ownership. The acquisition closed an hour ago. The deed transfer was expedited through a holding company over the weekend." Frederick frowned. "The Ritz sold? To who? Blackstone? Hyatt?" "No," Sterling said. He picked up a sleek black folder from his desk and opened it. The deed was transferred to a private holding company, SC Holdings. Frederick froze. SC. Susan Carter Graves. "It's a coincidence," Frederick muttered, though his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. SC could stand for anything. SC Holdings, LLC. Sterling read from the document, his eyes locking onto Frederick's with a strange mix of pity and professional detachment. Registered agent, Floyd Jones. The new owner issued a specific directive regarding data retention. Sterling turned a laptop screen toward Frederick. "All surveillance footage from the past 72 hours has been uploaded to a secure off-site server. Access is restricted to the owner directly." Frederick stared at the screen. The envelope of cash felt suddenly pathetic. A child's toy offered to stop a tank. Susan. Susan owned the hotel. Or rather, the old man did. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They weren't just watching him. They were buying the ground he stood on. "Get out," Sterling said quietly, not looking up as he returned to his paperwork. "The owner has also requested that you be placed on the Do Not Admit list. Security will escort you to the curb." Frederick sat in his corner office, the panoramic view of the skyline offering no comfort. The declined cards, the sold debt, the hotel buyout. It was a coordinated strike. Floyd Jones was dismantling his life with the terrifying efficiency of a demolition crew. But Frederick Graves was a survivor. He knew that when you couldn't defend your territory, you attacked the enemy's credibility. He picked up the phone and dialed his attorney, Marcus. "I need to file an emergency petition, Section 12 guardianship. Immediate effect." "Against who?" Marcus asked, the sound of rustling papers in the background. "My wife, Susan." Frederick swiveled his chair away from the window, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She's unwell, Marcus. The grief has snapped her mind. She's making irrational financial decisions, liquidating assets, buying properties we don't need. She's being manipulated by her father. who is clearly suffering from senile dementia. He paused, letting the lie settle. It was elegant in its cruelty. If he could have Susan declared mentally incompetent due to acute grief trauma, he would gain control of her trust, fund, and by extension, the billions Floyd was funneling through her name. He would use their own money to bury them. "I have witnesses," Frederick continued, his confidence returning. "I can get Dr. Evans to testify she was hysterical at the hospital. Screaming, praying inappropriately, delusional. I'll paint a picture of a woman so broken she can't be trusted with a checkbook, let alone a corporation." "It's a high bar, Frederick," Marcus warned. "Judges don't like taking rights away from grieving mothers." "This judge will," Frederick said, glancing at the photo on his desk, not of his family, but of himself shaking hands with Judge Holloway at a fundraiser last month. "Holloway owes me a favor. Draft the papers. Claim she's a danger to herself and the family estate. I want her assets frozen by close of business tomorrow." He hung up and leaned back, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. It was the gaslight maneuver, a strategy he had used in hostile takeovers. Before, paint the opposition as emotional, unstable, hysterical. Make the world believe he was the steady hand on the wheel, the suffering husband trying to save his wife from herself. He didn't know that while he was drafting affidavits, Susan was sitting in her father's study, staring at the same legal statutes. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't broken. She was listening to Floyd explain the difference between a trap and a grave. A trap is something you fall into. A grave is something you dig for yourself. And Frederick had just picked up the shovel. Frederick Graves mistook the silence for surrender. For 24 hours, there had been no counter-motions from Susan's legal team, no angry phone calls from Floyd, no process servers waiting in the lobby. In Frederick's world, a world of aggression and dominance, quiet meant fear. It meant his gaslight petition had worked, that the threat of a competency hearing had terrified Susan into submission, emboldened by this phantom victory. Frederick made his most arrogant move yet. He didn't just drive to the office. He brought Julia. "Are you sure this is okay?" Julia asked as the elevator ascended to the 40th floor, checking her lipstick in the polished brass doors. She was wearing a dress that was technically office appropriate, but fit her like a second skin, a deliberate signal to the staff that there was a new queen in the castle. "It's my company, Julia," Frederick said, smoothing his lapel. "Susan is out. By noon, the board will vote to remove her as a trustee due to incapacitating medical distress. I need you here to help me transition the decor." He smirked. "Besides, I'm tired of hiding. Winners don't hide." When the elevator doors pinged open, the office hummed with its usual frantic energy. But as Frederick and Julia walked down the main corridor, the typing stopped. Heads turned. Whispers trailed off like smoke. Frederick interpreted the stares as awe. He didn't notice they were actually looks of morbid anticipation, the way crowds watch a guillotine blade being hoisted. He marched into the boardroom, Julia clicking along behind him on red-soled stilettos. The long mahogany table was set with crystal water pitchers and thick binders. The agenda was simple. Item 1. Emergency restructuring of family trust control. "Sit there," Frederick commanded, pointing to a chair just off to the side of the head of the table, the seat usually reserved for legal counsel. "Take notes, or just look pretty. It doesn't matter." He checked his watch. 9:58 a.m. The board members would file in any second to rubber stamp his coup. He pictured Susan at home, likely medicated and weeping, while he solidified his grip on the empire. He felt invincible, a titan of industry who had shed the dead weight of a grieving wife to ascend to his true potential. He didn't know that 3 floors down, security had just cleared the elevators for a VIP arrival. He didn't know that the silence he had enjoyed wasn't fear. It was the deep breath a sniper takes before pulling the trigger. Frederick leaned back, putting his feet up on the table next to the agenda, completely unaware that he was sitting in the center of a kill box that Floyd Jones had spent 40 years designing. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom didn't just open. They were pushed wide by 2 private security guards Frederick didn't recognize. The chatter around the table died instantly. Frederick, mid-sentence about fiscal responsibility, froze with his hand raised in a gesture that now looked pathetic. Susan walked in. She wasn't wearing the black mourning weeds Frederick had expected. She wore a tailored white suit, sharp as a blade, her hair pulled back to reveal a face stripped of tears. She didn't look at the floor. She looked at him, and beside her walked Floyd Jones, no longer the shuffling pensioner in a cardigan, but a titan in a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than Frederick's car. The air in the room shifted, sucked out by the sheer gravity of their arrival. "Susan," Frederick started, his voice cracking slightly. He stood up, trying to regain height, to regain dominance. "This is a closed session. You're not mentally fit to—" "Sit down, Frederick," Susan said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a terrifying weight that slammed him back into his chair. Floyd moved to the head of the table. The current chairman, a man Frederick had spent years bribing with golf trips, scrambled out of the seat without a word, offering it to the old man like an offering to a god. Floyd didn't sit. He simply placed a single document on the mahogany surface. Over the last 72 hours, Jones Global has aggressively acquired a 51% controlling interest in Graves Enterprises. We bought your debt, your stock, and your mortgage. He looked at Julia, who was shrinking into her chair. And we own the building you're sitting in. Frederick looked around the table. The board members wouldn't meet his eyes. They knew. They had always known who the real money was. "You can't do this," Frederick sputtered, sweat breaking on his forehead. "I am the CEO. I built this." "You built nothing," Susan interrupted. She picked up the remote control for the projection screen. "You stole. You lied. And while your son was dying, you made a choice." She pressed a button. The room darkened. The massive screen behind Frederick flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was high-definition security footage. The timestamp in the corner read, Tuesday, 2:58 a.m. The room watched in horrified silence. On the left side of the screen, a digital clock overlaid the image. Time of death, 3 a.m. On the screen, Frederick Graves was visible in the hallway of the Ritz-Carlton. He was laughing, stumbling slightly, holding Julia's waist as she unlocked the door to Suite 404. As the clock ticked to 3 a.m., the exact minute, Anthony's heart stopped. Video Frederick pulled Julia into a kiss, kicking the door shut behind them with a carefree grin. The video froze on that grin. A gasp rippled through the boardroom. Julia covered her face with her hands. The shame was absolute. It was visceral. It wasn't just adultery. It was a desecration. Frederick stared at the screen, at his own smiling face, frozen in time while his son died alone. He felt the gaze of 20 people drilling into him, not with respect, not with fear, but with pure, unfiltered disgust. "You're fired, Frederick," Susan said, tossing the remote onto the table. The clatter sounded like a gunshot. "For cause, for moral turpitude, for gross negligence." She turned to security. "Get him out of my building." The walk from the boardroom to the elevator was the longest mile of Frederick Graves's life. He wasn't allowed to return to his office. He wasn't allowed to collect his coat. The security guards, men who used to open doors for him and call him Mr. Graves, now gripped his arms with a firmness that bordered on bruising. Julia stumbled behind him, clutching her purse, her heels clacking frantically as she tried to keep up, her face hidden behind a curtain of hair to shield herself from the stares of the secretaries and interns lining the hallway. They didn't take the executive elevator. They were marched to the freight lift, the metal box smelling of cleaning solvent and cardboard. When the doors opened to the lobby, the humiliation escalated. The front desk staff, the doormen, the porters, everyone stopped. They watched the king of the castle being dragged out like common trash. "This is illegal," Frederick shouted as they shoved him through the revolving doors onto the cold pavement. "I'll sue you. I'll sue all of you." But the street offered no sanctuary. A tow truck was already backed up to the curb, lifting the front bumper of his silver Aston Martin. The winch screamed as it hauled the sleek machine onto the flatbed. Frederick lunged forward, but a guard stepped in his path, a wall of impassive muscle. "That's my car. You can't take that." "Company property, sir," the guard said, his voice flat. "Return to the fleet." Frederick spun around, patting his pockets for his phone, his keys, anything. But his pockets were empty. He had left everything in the office. He looked at Julia, hoping for an ally, but she was already backing away, hailing a taxi, desperate to distance herself from the radioactive wreckage of his life. She didn't look back. 40 floors up, Susan stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of what was now her office. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, looking down at the small, frantic figure on the sidewalk. From this height, Frederick didn't look like a titan. He didn't look like a monster. He just looked like an ant, screaming at a world that had finally stopped listening. Floyd came to stand beside her, his presence warm and steady. He didn't speak. He just rested a hand on her shoulder. Susan watched the tow truck drive away with the last symbol of Frederick's vanity. She watched Frederick stand alone in the wind, his expensive suit flapping uselessly, realizing he had no car, no home, no money, and no one to call. A single tear traced a path down Susan's cheek. It wasn't for Frederick. It wasn't for the marriage that had been a lie. It was for Anthony. It was the final release of the breath she had been holding since the funeral. The monster was gone. The castle was reclaimed. And somewhere in the quiet of her heart, she felt the first true moment of peace. "It's done," she whispered to the glass. "It's done," Floyd echoed. Susan turned away from the window, leaving Frederick Graves in the past where he belonged, and walked toward the head of the table. There was work to do.